The Santa Cruz police line rings on the morning of April 23rd, 1973. On the other end, a deep, calm voice utters words that will chill the blood of anyone listening. This is Ed Kemper. I just killed my mother and her best friend. I'm waiting in a phone booth in Colorado. Come arrest me. The officers think it's a joke. They meet Ed, the kind, 6'6" young man who frequently brings them donuts and coffee, who listens to their stories with genuine fascination. Ed, who dreams of being a police officer. Ed, the gentle giant. But in the following hours, they will discover that this same man had been leading a double life, that while chatting with them about criminology, he was storing the dismembered bodies of young college students in his apartment, that his IQ of 145 surpassed that of almost the entire police force, and that he had turned California highways into his personal hunting ground. This is the story of the most intelligent serial killer in history, a man who murdered 10 people, including his own grandparents, when he was barely a teenager. A killer the FBI would consult years later to understand the criminal mind, a giant whose shadow still looms over modern criminology. Edmund Emil Kemper III was born on December 18, 1948, in Burbank, California. From the start, he was different. At 8 years old, he already stood over 5 feet tall, towering over children several years older. His body grew, but his childhood withered under the shadow of an alcoholic and verbally abusive mother. Clarnell Kemper is an imposing woman with a sharp tongue and a fiery temper. She works at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and projects all her frustrations onto her eldest son. She tells him he's stupid, that he'll never amount to anything, that he's too big and clumsy. But above all, she fears his emerging masculinity. Clarnell's paranoia leads her to make a decision that will mark Ed forever. She locks him in the basement of the house. Every night, the boy must go downstairs into the darkness, where he sleeps among rusty tools and leaking pipes. His mother fears that he might disturb his sisters if he sleeps upstairs. In that subterranean solitude, Ed's mind begins to twist. He develops elaborate fantasies. He plays disturbing games. He has his sister simulate her execution in the gas chamber, acting out the convulsions of death while she watches. He decapitates his sister's dolls. And when the family keeps cats as pets, Ed finds them his first victims. The first cat dies when Ed is 10. He buries it in the backyard with some ceremony. But days later, he digs it up. He takes it to his room and, using a kitchen knife, decapitates it. He keeps the head in his closet for months, visiting it like a secret trophy. At 13, the ritual becomes more elaborate. He adopts another cat, gains its trust, and then methodically kills and dismembers it. This time he studies anatomy, examining each organ with scientific curiosity. This isn't impulsive cruelty. It's deliberate experimentation. But animals aren't enough. Ed's fantasies evolve. He begins to imagine scenarios where he has absolute control over human bodies, where he can silence the voices that torment him, especially his mother's, where his size and strength are assets, not flaws. His grades at school are exceptional, his intelligence obvious. But socially, he's an outcast. His classmates mock his grotesque height and social awkwardness. Girls avoid him. Ed retreats further into his inner world, where he's powerful, where he has control. When Ed is 9, his parents divorce. His father, Edmund Jr., is a World War II veteran who never managed to connect emotionally with his family. The separation is brutal, filled with accusations and hatred. Clarnell wins custody, but her bitterness intensifies. She drinks more, she yells more, and Ed, trapped in his abnormal growth, becomes a primary target of her fury. She projects onto him everything she hates about her ex-husband, his masculinity, his dominant physical presence, his potential for violence. Ed begs to live with his father. He writes desperate letters. When his father finally agrees at age 13, Ed believes he's finally escaped hell. He moves to a farm in Northern California, where his father has remarried, but hope lasts less than a year. His father's new wife doesn't want the giant teenager in the house. They see him as a threat, an uncomfortable reminder of the past. And so they make the decision that will seal their fate. They send Ed to live with his paternal grandparents on a remote farm in North Fork, California. It's the summer of 1963. Ed is 14 years old, almost 6 feet tall, and his mind is a powder keg waiting for a spark. Edmund and Maud Kemper's farm is an isolated place, surrounded by golden fields and distant mountains. It should be a refuge, a place for Ed to find peace. But for him, it's just another prison. His grandparents are strict old people with rigid values. Maud, in particular, is domineering, critical, with a sharp tongue that's too reminiscent of Clarnell. She controls every aspect of Ed's life. What he eats, when he goes out, who he talks to. Grandma constantly reminds him that she's there out of charity, that she's a burden. Ed helps with farm chores. He feeds the chickens, mends fences, and works under the relentless sun. But in his mind, the fantasies grow darker, more specific. They're no longer just abstract images of power and control. Now they have faces. Now they include detailed steps. He has access to firearms. His grandfather teaches him how to shoot. He's a good shot, his hand steady despite his size. At night, in his small room, he cleans the rifles while imagining scenarios. He wonders how it would feel, if he'd have the courage, if the relief he imagines would be real. Summer is advancing. The heat is intensifying. And tension on the farm is growing like pressure in a pot about to explode. It's August 27th, 1964. Ed is 15 years old. The day begins like any other. A quiet breakfast, morning chores, the constant weight of his grandmother's disapproval. But something is different today. An argument. Maud criticizes Ed for something trivial, perhaps the way he completed a task or his attitude. Her words are sharp, designed to humiliate. And something in Ed snaps. He goes to his room. He takes out the .22 caliber rifle his grandfather gave him. He loads it with hands that don't shake. And he returns to the kitchen where his grandmother is preparing lunch. Maud's back is turned when Ed raises a rifle. He fires once. The bullet enters the back of her head. She falls instantly. Ed fires 2 more times, making sure. Then, in a frenzy he barely remembers afterward, he stabs her repeatedly with a kitchen knife. The violence surprises him. The rush of adrenaline. The sudden silence in the kitchen, broken only by his labored breathing and the dripping of blood on the linoleum floor. But there's no time to process. His grandfather, Edmund, will soon be returning from shopping in the village. Ed must decide, flee or continue. And in his distorted mind, there's a twisted logic. His grandfather will discover what he's done. He will suffer. It will be more merciful to kill him, too. Wait. When the family car pulls up in front of the house, Ed gets out with the rifle. His grandfather barely has time to register the scene before Ed fires. A bullet to the chest. Edmund falls to the gravel driveway, dying in the California sun. Ed stands between 2 bodies. He's 15 years old, and he's just crossed a threshold from which he'll never return. Ed remains at the farmhouse for almost an hour after murders. He doesn't run away. He doesn't panic. Instead, he enters the house, avoiding looking directly at the bodies, and dials his mother's phone number. Clarnell is in his office at Santa Cruz State University when he gets the call. Ed's voice is strangely calm as he utters the words, "Mom, I had to do it. I killed Grandma and Grandpa." Clarnell's reaction reveals everything about their relationship. She doesn't ask if he's joking. She doesn't scream in disbelief. She simply orders him to call the police. She knows, on some deep level, that her son is capable of this. When officers arrive at the remote farmhouse, they find a disconcerting scene. The giant teenager sits on the porch, his rifle leaning against the wall. Bodies are found inside and outside the house. There's no evidence of a burglary or prolonged struggle. It's pure execution. During interrogation, Ed provides an explanation that will confound psychiatrists for years. "I just wanted to see what it felt like to kill Grandma. I killed Grandpa, so he wouldn't have to find out I killed his wife. I thought he'd be nicer." Ed is too young for prison. Instead, the system sends him to Atascadero State Hospital, a maximum security psychiatric institution in Central California. It's December 1964. Ed will spend the next 5 years there. The psychiatrists who initially evaluate him are divided. Some diagnose him with paranoid schizophrenia. pointing to his elaborate fantasies and emotional disconnection. Others see antisocial personality, classic psychopathy. His IQ, measured at 136, complicates everything. Ed is bright, articulate, and able to present himself in ways that contradict his actions. But there is consensus on one point. He is extremely dangerous. Early reports warn that he should never be released, that he poses a permanent threat. One psychiatrist writes, "If this young man is released, he will kill again. It's only a matter of time." Atascadero is neither an ordinary prison nor a typical hospital. It's a limbo where California's most disturbed criminals converge. Rapists, murderers, pedophiles, all mixed together in a facility operating with limited resources and inadequate oversight. For most patients, Atascadero is the end of the road. But for Ed, it's a university. His exceptional intelligence allows him to absorb information like a sponge, and he's surrounded by the best crime professors he could find. He befriends serial rapists who share their techniques. He listens to more experienced killers describe their methods. He learns about mistakes that led to captures, how to avoid leaving evidence, and psychological manipulation, all presented as casual stories during recess or group therapy sessions. But Ed learns something more valuable: how to fool psychiatrists. He studies psychological tests, memorizing the correct answers. He observes which behaviors generate approval, which words reassure the doctors. He develops a mask of normalcy, so convincing that he'll eventually forget where the mask ends and he begins. Physically, Ed continues to grow in Atascadero. At 17, he reaches his final height, 6 feet 6 inches. He weighs over 2,000 pounds. His presence is intimidating, commanding, but he learns to soften it. He cultivates an affable, helpful personality. He volunteers for work in the institution's library, where he devours books on psychology, criminology, and anatomy. He reads everything he can find on criminal investigation, forensic techniques, and psychological profiling. His memory is photographic. He can quote passages from books weeks after reading them. The guard begin to view him as a model prisoner, not a threat. Younger psychiatrists, less familiar with his story, find him articulate and introspective. Ed administers his own therapy. In sessions, he talks about understanding his past impulses. He uses correct psychological terminology. He expresses remorse in the exact tone doctors expect to hear. Not too dramatic, which would seem fake. Not too casual, which would reveal his true nature. By 1969, Ed had spent 5 years in Atascadero. He had been evaluated dozens of times. His results had consistently improved. The most recent reports directly contradicted the earlier ones. They now describe a rehabilitated, mature young man who poses no significant threat. The new psychiatrist who didn't work with Ed initially see only what he wants to show: a well-educated young man who committed a terrible crime under extraordinary circumstances of domestic abuse, who has received treatment, who has grown, who deserves a second chance. The psychological tests they administer are the same ones Ed has studied exhaustively. He knows every trick question, every pattern they look for. When they ask him about violent fantasies, he replies that he no longer has them, that the treatment worked. When they explore his relationship with his mother, he expresses a desire for reconciliation, to show her that he's changed. It's perfect theater. And the doctors, overloaded with hundreds of cases and eager to showcase their rehabilitation successes, buy every word. In 1969, at the age of 21, Ed Kemper was transferred from Atascadero to Salinas under reduced security conditions. It was the first step toward freedom. Psychiatrists recommended that he be released into the custody of someone responsible, preferably not his mother. But here the system makes a fatal error. Despite all the previous warnings, despite the documented history of conflict with maternal figures, despite early reports that specifically warned against this, the authorities decide to release him into Clarnell's custody. She now lives in Aptos, a suburb of Santa Cruz. She works at the university and has a small apartment. When Ed leaves the institution in 1970, she welcomes him back. The relationship that broke a child and created a murderer is now reestablished, more toxic than ever. Ed is technically free, but under strict probation. He must regularly see a psychiatrist, report to a probation officer, and abide by a curfew. He lives with his mother in a shared apartment, where destructive family dynamics immediately flare up. Clarnell hasn't changed. She still drinks. She's still critical. She still verbally attacks her son. But now Ed is an adult, a giant, and he spent 5 years learning exactly how to kill without being caught. The fantasies he suppressed in the Tascadero return, stronger than ever, and this time he has the freedom, the means, and the knowledge to make them a reality. But first you need to prepare. You need to practice. You need to perfect your method. Santa Cruz in 1970 is an idyllic college town on the California coast. The local University of California campus is booming. Young students, many participating in the hippie counterculture, fill the streets. There's trust and openness. Hitchhiking is common, almost ritual. Ed observes all this with scientific interest. He gets a job at the California Highway Department, driving all over the area. He buys a car, a yellow Ford Galaxy, which he keeps spotlessly clean, and he starts frequenting a bar called the Jury Room, where Santa Cruz police officers gather after their shifts. His strategy is brilliant. He presents himself as an aspiring police officer, which technically he was in his youth. He buys rounds of drinks. He listens to stories about investigations, procedures, and mistakes that allow criminals to escape. The officers adopt him as a mascot, this gentle giant who wants to be one of them. They nickname him Big Ed. They give him an honorary reserve police badge. They never suspect that while absorbing their investigative techniques, Ed is plotting ways to evade them. Before killing, Ed needs to practice his method. For months in 1971, he drives the highways of Santa Cruz, picking up hitchhikers, mostly young women, students. He takes them to their destinations without incident. He's refining his image. He's learning what makes him feel safe. His polite conversation, his references to working for the state, his clean, professional appearance. He discovers that his size, initially intimidating, becomes reassuring when combined with his gentle manner. He installs special locks on his car doors, controlled only from the driver's seat. He places blankets in the trunk. He buys tools and stores them in hidden compartments, knives, plastic bags, rope. His car becomes a perfectly designed mobile trap. But he's not ready to kill yet. First, he must resolve his mother problem. Clarnell torments him daily. Their arguments escalate. She criticizes his failure to find a better job, his lack of a girlfriend, his very existence. The apartment's thin walls amplify each insult. Ed knows he'll kill her eventually. But first, he needs practice with victims who won't raise immediate alarms. He needs to understand the process, perfect the technique. And the roads of Santa Cruz provide him with an endless supply of potential targets. In 1972, Ed is 23 years old and still living with his mother. His parole technically continues, although meetings with a psychiatrist have become routine, meaningless. No one notices the warning signs. Then something happens that pushes Ed over the edge. His mother gets a new boyfriend, a man who occasionally stays at the apartment. For Ed, it's intolerable. His fantasies about killing his mother intensify, but he also recognizes that killing her now will make him an immediate suspect. He needs to establish a different pattern first. If there are other murders unrelated to him, his eventual murder of Clarnell could appear to be part of a series. It's strategic thinking, long-term planning. In February, Ed does something crucial. He requests that his juvenile record be sealed. He argues that the stigma of his past prevents him from finding a better job or rebuilding his life. His psychiatrist, convinced of his rehabilitation, supports the request, and in a ruling that will horrify in retrospect, the judge approves the record sealing. Officially, Ed Kemper is no longer a convicted murderer. His past is hidden. He can pass background checks. And most importantly, when police eventually search for murder suspects in the area, his name won't raise any red flags. It's May 7th, 1972. Ed is driving down the highway near Fresno, officially on a work trip. He sees two young girls hitchhiking, Marian Pesci, 18, and Anita Lucchesa, also 18. Both are students at Fresno State College, traveling to Stanford for the weekend. Ed stops. His presence is reassuring. Clean car, work uniform, friendly smile. The girls get in without hesitation. Marian in front, Anita in back. The conversation is light as Ed drives. but not toward Stanford. He takes rural detours, explaining that he knows faster routes. When Marion notices her going the wrong way, Ed reveals a gun. His voice remains calm as he orders Mary and to get in the back seat. He takes them to a remote area. He puts handcuffs on Anita's wrists. Then, methodically, he stabs them. Marion first, then Anita. The violence is explosive but controlled. When they're done moving, Ed places them in the trunk of his car. But it's not over. He drives back to Aptus, hoping his mother's at work. The apartment is empty. He carries the bodies inside. And for the next few hours, he conducts what he describes as experiments. What Ed does to Mary and in Anita's bodies reveals the depth of his pathology. It's not impulsive violence. It's methodical curiosity combined with deeply disturbed sexual fantasy. He decapitates them. He uses their heads for necrophilic sexual acts. He dissects the bodies with almost surgical precision, studying anatomy as he did with the cats in his childhood. He takes Polaroid photographs from multiple angles, documenting his work. The hours pass. Ed is completely absorbed, feeling no remorse or fear. There's only fascination, excitement, and a sense of absolute power. These women, who in life probably would never have looked at him twice, are now completely his. When he's done, he cleans up meticulously. He seals the body parts in plastic bags. He waits until nightfall, when his mother is asleep, and loads them back into his car. He drives to remote mountainous areas and scatters the parts in different locations, making identification and connections difficult. He returns to the apartment at dawn. He showers. He makes coffee. And when his mother wakes up, Ed is sitting at the table, reading the newspaper, the perfect sun on a perfect morning. The days after the murders are revealing. Ed shows no outward signs of guilt or nervousness. He goes to work as usual. He continues to frequent the jury room, buying beers for the officers who will soon investigate his crimes. When the bodies of Marion and Anita are discovered in separate locations, days apart, the Santa Cruz police launch an investigation. But there are few leads. The bodies are too decomposed for detailed forensic analysis. There are no witnesses. The students simply vanish from a busy road. Ed observes the investigation with professional interest. In the jury room, he listens to the detectives discuss theories. He offers his own speculation. No one notices that his theories are disturbingly accurate because no one suspects that the gentle giant serving them beer could be the killer. For Ed, the murders were a revelation. They confirmed that he can do it without being caught, that he's smarter than the investigators, that his planning and preparation work. The fantasies about his mother remain, but now he has an outlet. The roads of Santa Cruz are full of potential victims. His car is ready. His method is proven. And most importantly, he has an insatiable appetite for more. After the first few murders, Ed enters a period of relative calm. It's not remorse that stops him, it's pragmatism. He's learned from his teachers in Atascadero that serial killers are caught when they establish overly obvious patterns, when they kill too frequently in the same area. So he waits. He continues his normal life, work, visits to the police bar, fights with his mother. But internally, he's evolving. Polaroids of Mary Ann and Anita are hidden in his room. He visits them regularly, reliving the murders, planning improvements for the next one. Santa Cruz develops a sinister reputation during this period. Other unrelated murders occur in the area, creating an atmosphere of fear. There are cases of ritual murders in the mountains, mutilated bodies found in scenes that suggest occultism. They are not Ed's work, but the confusion benefits his anonymity. It's September 15th, 1972. Ed is driving through Berkeley when he spots Aiko Ku, a 15-year-old girl of Asian descent, hitchhiking. Aiko is a dance student on her way to class. She's small, delicate, trusting. Ed stops. Aiko climbs in without hesitation. The conversation flows naturally, Ed projecting his carefully constructed persona as a friendly young man. But he soon veers off course, leading her into the rural areas of the mountains. By the time Aiko realizes something is wrong, it's too late. Ed produces a pistol. In a remote location, he manually strangles her. His enormous strength renders Aiko's resistance useless. The act takes only minutes. What follows is familiar. He takes the body to his apartment while his mother is away and performs his rituals of necrophilic rape and dismemberment. But this time there's a complication. His mother returns unexpectedly early. Ed hears the key in the lock. Aiko's body is in her bedroom closet. Evidence is everywhere, but he maintains perfect composure. He greets his mother normally, chatting about his day. That night, while Clarnell sleeps in the next room, Ed completes his work on Aiko's body. The proximity of being discovered doesn't scare Ed. It excites him. It proves how superior his control is, how perfect his mask is, and it fuels his growing contempt for authorities who fail to see him. In January 1973, the frequency increases. Ed grows more confident, hungrier. His hunting territory expands. He no longer waits months between victims. The urge is stronger, the need more urgent. On January 5th, he picks up 19-year-old Cabrillo University student Cindy Shaw. He shoots her dead in her car in a remote area. He takes the body back to her apartment. This time he's even bolder. Her mother is home, asleep. Ed works silently in the bathroom, dismembering the body in the bathtub. He keeps body parts in plastic bags in his room for days, while his mother is yards away. Eventually, he scatters the parts across multiple locations, but he makes a mistake. He throws Cindy's head off a cliff near the campus where his mother works. It's an almost subconscious act of defiance toward Clarnell. On February 8, 1973, just a month later, Ed sees two students hitchhiking together near the Santa Cruz campus, Rosalind Thorpe, 23, and Alice Liu, 20. They are roommates, returning from class. Ed pulls over. The girls, seeing a seemingly ordinary man in a clean car, get in, Rosalind in front, Alice in back. Ed starts driving out of town, toward the wooded mountains. When the girls question the route, Ed reveals his gun. But this time something goes wrong. Rosalind tries to grab the gun. There's a brief struggle. Ed fires, killing her instantly. Alice, panicking, tries to open the back door, but the special locks keep her trapped. Ed turns and shoots her too. Two bodies in his car, in broad daylight. Ed has to act fast. He drives to an even more remote area. He opens a trunk and places the bodies inside, but they're bleeding profusely. The inside of his car is covered in blood. This time he can't take them to his apartment. It's too risky in broad daylight. Instead, he decapitates them right there in the woods. He takes the heads with him, but leaves the bodies hidden in the undergrowth. He's less methodical than before, more hurried. With 6 victims in less than a year, Santa Cruz is in a state of panic. Local media dubs the killer the co-ed killer. The university issues warnings. Students stop hitchhiking. There are increased police patrols. Police know the victims are connected. All young, all students are college-aged, all missing from area roads. But they have no viable suspects. The crime scenes provide little forensic evidence. The bodies are too decomposed or scattered for useful analysis. Ed watches the investigation from a front-row seat in the jury room. The detectives are frustrated, exhausted. They share increasingly desperate theories. Satanic cults, organized crime gangs, multiple killers working together. They never consider that it could be one of them, the gentle giant listening so intently. But Ed feels the pressure. He knows each murder increases the risk. Residents are more alert. Potential victims are more cautious. And the media attention means he'll eventually make a mistake that connects him to the crimes. In March 1973, Ed recognizes his window of opportunity is closing. The investigation intensifies. There are vague descriptions of a large man in a yellow car picking up hitchhikers. Not specific yet, but getting closer. And his fantasies about his mother have reached a critical point. Every day with Clarnell is torture. Every insult, every criticism, every look of contempt fuels his hatred. The other victims were substitutes, practical ones. But he always knew it would end with her. Ed begins planning his final act. He's learned from his mistakes with Rosalind and Alice. He knows exactly how to proceed. And this time there won't be any need to hide the body or scatter parts. This time, after killing his mother, he'll turn himself in. It's not guilt that motivates the decision. It's twisted pragmatism. Ed knows it's only a matter of time before he's caught. The jury room cops have taught him too much about investigations to believe he can escape indefinitely. And there's a certain poetic perfection in ending where he began, with a maternal figure. But first, he must wait for the right moment. He must make sure Clarnell is alone, that there are no interruptions. He must prepare his escape afterward, even though he knows it will be temporary. Good Friday, 1973, is approaching. Ed marks the date mentally. It will be a fitting end to his work. It's Thursday, April 20th, 1973. Ed wakes up in the apartment he shares with his mother, knowing that tomorrow will change everything. He's made the final decision. No more substitutes, no more practice. Tomorrow night, he'll kill Clarnell. The day passes in a strange calm. He goes to work, completes his routine duties with the highway department, and has lunch at his usual spot. To outside observers, it's a completely normal day. But in his mind, Ed is reviewing every step of what's to come. That night, she has dinner with her mother. The conversation is tense as always. Clarnell sips wine, complains about her college work, and criticizes something about Ed's appearance or habits. He responds in monosyllables, observing her with clinical detachment. After dinner, Clarnell announces he'll be leaving early Friday morning for a university event. He'll be gone for most of Good Friday. For Ed, this is crucial information. It means he'll have the apartment to himself for hours after the event. That night, Ed can't sleep, not from nervousness or remorse, but from anticipation. He's been waiting for this for years, since those days in the basement of his childhood, since the fights that led him to kill his grandparents. Every previous victim has been a prelude to this moment. It's around 5 in the morning, on April 21st, when Clarnell finally returns home. The university event has gone on for a while, and then she's gone drinking with colleagues. She's drunk and in a bad mood. Ed hears her coming in, hears her heavy footsteps in the hallway. She gets ready for bed without a word. Her bedroom door closes. Ed waits, listening. Half an hour. An hour. He needs to be sure she's fast asleep. Around 5 in the morning, Ed quietly enters his mother's room. He carries a claw hammer in one hand. Clarnell is lying face up in bed, snoring softly. The early morning light barely illuminates the room. Ed raises the hammer and smashes it against his mother's temple. She wakes instantly, screaming. He strikes again, and again. The violence is explosive, years of fury concentrated in brutal moments. When he finally stops, Clarnell is dead, but Ed isn't finished. He takes a knife from the kitchen. He decapitates his mother in her own bed. He brings the head into the living room, places it on a mantelpiece, and yells at her, unleashing decades of verbal abuse. Then, in a final act of desecration, he uses the head for sexual acts. Then, almost as an afterthought, he rips out Clarnell's larynx and throws it down the garbage disposal. Years later, he would describe this act as symbolic. Even when I yelled at her, she wouldn't shut up. It seemed appropriate that the larynx should end up in the garbage disposal. All her life she'd been yelling at me, making me feel worthless. I thought it was the perfect place for that part of her. It's barely 6 in the morning. Ed is standing in a blood-covered apartment, with his mother's decapitated body in the bedroom. His original plan was to clean up, escape, and perhaps have days before the body was discovered. But there's a problem. She knows that her mother's best friend, Sally Hallett, frequently visits unannounced. In fact, Clarnell mentioned that Sally might be coming over for the weekend. If Sally arrives and discovers the scene, she'll call the police immediately. Ed will be the obvious suspect. Ed's twisted logic leads to an unavoidable conclusion. He must eliminate Sally as well, not out of desire or fantasy, but out of practical necessity. She's a potential witness, a loose end. Ed calls Sally from his mother's phone, imitating Clarnell's voice with unnerving accuracy. He makes up an excuse about needing help with something urgent and asks Sally to come immediately. Sally, unsuspecting, agrees. When Sally Hallett arrives around 9 in the morning, Ed is waiting. She enters the apartment without hesitation, expecting to find her friend. Instead, she finds her friend's giant son. Before she can process the scene, Ed strangles and bludgeons her to death. Ed now has 2 bodies in the apartment. He spends the rest of Good Friday meticulously cleaning. He washes walls, floors, and surfaces. He wraps the bodies in plastic. His previous experience with crime scene cleanup serves him well. But as the day progresses, something changes in Ed. The adrenaline fades. He stares at the bodies of his mother and Sally. And for the first time, he feels something resembling emptiness. Not remorse exactly, but the absence of the contentment he anticipated. Killing Clarnell should have been a climax, a final release. But it feels hollow. The fantasies that sustained him for years have evaporated, leaving only the stark reality. He's a murderer of 10 people, including his own mother. There are no more games, no more masks to maintain. That night, Ed sits in the living room of the quiet apartment. The bodies are in separate rooms. Outside, Santa Cruz is celebrating Easter weekend, unaware that in this unassuming apartment, one of California's most notorious massacres has reached its conclusion. Ed considers his options. He can flee, perhaps make it to Mexico. He has some money, access to a car, but he knows the investigation will eventually find him. The jury room cops have taught him that almost all fugitives are caught, or he can stay and face the consequences. But that means the probable death penalty. And strangely, Ed discovers he doesn't want to die. He wants to live. He wants to tell his story. He wants the world to understand his brilliance. On Easter Sunday morning, Ed loads tools and a few belongings into his car. He leaves the bodies in the apartment. He makes no attempt to hide or disguise them. Instead, he simply closes the door and drives away. He drives east, with no particular destination. He drives through Nevada, listening to the radio, hoping to hear news about the discovery of the bodies. But hours, then days, pass with nothing. No one has reported Clarnell or Sally missing. Ed continues on to Colorado. He checks into a cheap motel in Pueblo. And there, in an anonymous room miles from his crimes, reality finally catches up with him. There's no satisfaction in freedom. There's no triumph in having escaped. Only emptiness. It's Monday, April 23rd, 1973. Around 5 p.m. Ed has been in town for hours, staring at the motel walls. Finally, he walks to a nearby phone booth. He dials the Santa Cruz police number. His heart is beating fast, but his voice is perfectly calm when the operator answers. "I need to speak to an officer. I have information about the Coed killer murders." He's transferred. Ed identifies and utters the words he's been mentally rehearsing. "I'm Ed Kemper. I killed my mother and her friend Sally Hallett this weekend. I also killed the schoolgirls. All of them. I'm in Pueblo, Colorado. They should send someone to arrest me." There's silence on the line. Then the officer, clearly confused, says, "Ed, is that you? Is this a joke?" Ed recognizes the voice. It's one of the jury room officers, one he's had beers with dozens of times. The irony is perfect. This isn't a joke. "Check my mother's apartment in Aptus. You'll find the bodies. I'll be waiting here." Ed hangs up. He returns to the motel and waits. 2 hours later, the Pueblo police arrive in force. They find him sitting calmly in the room, unarmed, unresisting. As he's handcuffed, Ed Kemper smiles. His reign of terror is over, but his legacy is just beginning. Ed Kemper is transported back to California under intensive custody. The flight from Colorado to San Francisco is packed with federal marshals, all aware that they are escorting one of the most prolific serial killers in recent history. But Ed is a model prisoner. Cooperative, polite, almost cheerful. He answers basic questions with ease. The officers expect to find a crazed monster. Instead, they find an articulate man who talks about his crimes with almost academic detachment. By the time they arrive in Santa Cruz, the media is already in a frenzy. Authorities have confirmed the bodies of Clarnell and Sally. They've connected physical evidence in the apartment to the previous murders. And now they know that the gentle giant who frequented the jury room was the killer they were desperately seeking. The detectives who drank with Ed are in shock. They review every conversation, every joke, every shared moment. How did they miss the signs? How could he have fooled them so completely? The interrogations begin immediately. Ed is placed in a room with two experienced detectives. They expect resistance, denial, and demands for a lawyer. Instead, Ed requests coffee and begins to talk. For 48 hours, with only brief breaks, Ed details each murder. He doesn't just admit to the crimes. He describes them with photographic accuracy, the dates, locations, methods, and body locations. The detectives verify every detail and discover that Ed is telling the absolute truth. He describes how he picked up Marion, Pesci, and Anita Lucchesa, how he took them to a remote area, and how he killed them. He explains his dismemberment process with almost medical terminology. He details his necrophilic acts without shame or apparent emotion. The detectives are simultaneously fascinated and horrified. They've never interviewed a suspect so cooperative, so articulate about such heinous crimes. Ed not only admits what he did, but explains why and how, providing insights into his psychology that no police training course could teach. When he describes his mother's murder, there's something different in his voice. Not remorse, but a certain finality. He explains the abusive relationship, the psychological damage, the inevitability of her death. It was always going to end this way, Ed says. She created this, and I ended it. While Ed confesses, forensic teams work at multiple scenes. The Aptis apartment is meticulously processed. They find evidence of extensive cleaning, but also traces of blood connecting multiple victims. In Ed's room, they find his Polaroid collection. They're exactly as he described, graphic images of his victims in various stages of dismemberment. They also find souvenirs, the victim's jewelry, IDs, and small personal items he kept as trophies. His car, a yellow Ford Galaxy, is completely stripped down. They find hair, fibers, and tiny bloodstains that Ed's cleaning didn't remove. Each piece of evidence confirms his confession. The teams search the sites where Ed scattered body parts. Using his precise addresses, they recover remains that have been missing for months. Cindy Shaw's head is found exactly where Ed said he dumped it, near the campus where his mother worked. The physical evidence not only confirms Ed's guilt, but reveals something even more disturbing. How close he came to remaining uncaptured. Had he not surrendered, had he successfully escaped, he could have continued for years. The state of California must determine whether Ed is competent to stand trial. Psychiatrists are brought in to evaluate him. It's a tense process, fraught with irony. These are the same professionals whose discipline Ed studied exhaustively, whose evidence he learned to cheat. But now Ed has no reason to lie. He's decided he wants to be tried, convicted, and executed. He believes the death penalty is appropriate for his crimes. So in these assessments, he finally reveals his true colors. Psychiatrists find him to be an individual of extraordinary intelligence with profoundly antisocial personality. He shows no genuine empathy for his victims. He discusses his murders with the detachment of a scientist describing experiments. When asked if he feels remorse, Ed answers honestly, "I understand intellectually that what I did was wrong, but I don't feel what you expect me to feel." A psychiatrist notes that Ed shows more emotion when discussing his relationship with his mother than when describing the murders of his other victims. For Ed, Klarna was the only real victim. The others were objects, means to an end, practice for the main act. The evaluators conclude that Ed is fully competent. He understands the nature of his crimes and can participate in his own defense. But they also note something else. He is one of the most dangerous psychopaths they've encountered, precisely because his intelligence allows him to function so well in society. During the investigation, disturbing questions arise about Ed's time at Atascadero State Hospital. How could someone who murdered his grandparents, who was initially diagnosed as extremely dangerous, be free to commit even more heinous crimes? Records are reviewed. The psychiatrists who recommended Ed's release are questioned. Some are retired. Others, facing the consequences of their error, offer defensive explanations. Ed was brilliant at cheating evaluations. The system was overburdened. They genuinely believed in rehabilitation. But there's a darker side. Atascadero records reveal that Ed not only studied psychology during his confinement, but was also exposed to some of California's most violent criminals. The state, in an attempt to rehabilitate him, inadvertently created a school for serial killers. One particular detail emerges from interviews with the Atascadero staff. Ed administered psychological tests for other inmates during his senior year. He had access to the tests themselves, the scoring guides, and the response profiles. He literally studied the tools he later used to deceive his evaluators. In subsequent interviews, Ed offers his own interpretation of his crimes. It's a self-serving narrative, designed to present him as an inevitable product of abuse, but also reveals uncomfortable truths about his psychology. He explains that the murders of his grandparents were an experiment to see if he could do it, that the schoolgirls were a practice to develop his method, that everything inevitably led to Clarnell. "My mother created me," Ed says in an interview. "She locked me in that basement. She told me I was useless, stupid, dangerous. She taught me to hate, to want to control, to need to silence the voices that tormented me. She planted the seeds. I only cultivated them." It's a convenient explanation that ignores his own agency, his own choices. Psychiatrists note that Ed uses his history of abuse as an explanatory narrative, but shows no real understanding of the impact of his actions on others. When asked about his victims, Ed describes them in purely functional terms. They were stand-ins for his mother. They were available targets in his hunting grounds. He never mentions them by name unless specifically asked. To Ed, they ceased to be people the moment they got into his car. Edmund Kemper's trial begins in October 1973, just 6 months after his arrest. Santa Cruz has never seen anything like it. Reporters from across the country converge on the sleepy coastal town. The courthouse is besieged daily by curious crowds. Ed's defense strategy is unusual. He pleads not guilty by reason of insanity. He doesn't deny the murders. That would be impossible given his detailed confession and the physical evidence. Instead, his lawyers argue that his history of mental illness, his time in Atascadero, and his childhood abuse all demonstrate that he couldn't distinguish between right and wrong at the time of crimes. The prosecution counters with Ed's own behavior. They point to his meticulous planning, his ability to deceive police for months, his careful cleanup of crime scenes. All of this points to a man who knew exactly what he was doing and deliberately worked to avoid capture. The most dramatic moment of the trial comes when Ed Kemper testifies in his own defense. The 6'6" giant sits in the witness box, filling the space, his physical presence intimidating even in this controlled setting. For days, Ed describes his crimes with the same clinical precision he displayed during interrogations. He doesn't evade questions, shows no emotion when presented with crime scene photographs. The jurors are visibly disturbed. Some avoid looking directly at him. The defense attempts to demonstrate his insanity through these descriptions. They argue that no sane person could discuss such atrocities so calmly. But the prosecution counters brilliantly. Ed's composure, his articulation, his perfect memory, all demonstrate complete control, not insanity. During cross-examination, the prosecutor asks a crucial question. "Mr. Kemper, you studied psychology extensively at Atascadero. You learned how to cheat psychological tests. Isn't it true that your insanity plea is just another manipulation?" Ed considers the question with his characteristically disturbing honesty. It's possible. I'm not sure where real madness ends and manipulation begins. Perhaps both are true. Multiple psychiatrists testify for both the defense and the prosecution. Their opinions diverge dramatically, turning the trial into a debate about the very nature of criminal responsibility. Defense experts argue that Ed suffers from paranoid schizophrenia, that his fantasies were symptoms of severe mental illness. They cite his history in Atascadero, his early diagnoses, and the documented psychological damage from his childhood. The prosecution's experts present a different case. They argue that Ed is a classic psychopath, not schizophrenic, that his exceptional intelligence allowed him to function in society while satisfying murderous impulses, that every decision he made, from studying psychological tests to cultivating relationships with police officers, demonstrates rationality and premeditation. A prosecution psychiatrist offers particularly devastating testimony. Edmund Kemper is possibly the most intelligent serial killer I've ever studied. His IQ is in the genius range. He doesn't just understand evil well, He understands these concepts better than most people. He simply chooses evil because it gives him satisfaction. After deliberating for 5 hours, the jury returned with its verdict on November 8, 1973. Ed stood up, his height making the deputies around him look like children. The judge read, "Guilty on 8 counts of first-degree murder." The trial didn't include the murders of his grandparents, as those were tried in juvenile court. But the 8 victims from 1972 to 1973 are enough. Ed shows no visible reaction. He had anticipated this outcome. The sentencing phase begins. Normally, this would be when the defense attorney would plead for leniency. But Ed himself takes an unusual step. He tells his attorney to request the death penalty. "If anyone deserves to die for these crimes, it's me," Ed tells the judge. "I see no reason to continue living. I did what I did. I accept the full consequences." The judge, faced with an unprecedented request from the defendant himself to be executed, finds himself in a difficult position. The death penalty was technically available in California in 1973, although its legal status is uncertain due to recent constitutional challenges. After considering the aggravating factors, the heinous nature of the crimes, and Ed's own express wishes, the judge sentences Edmund Kemper to 8 concurrent life terms, with the possibility of parole only after serving the minimum time on each term. It's a sentence that effectively guarantees that Ed will spend the rest of his life in prison. But it's not the death penalty Ed requested. The reason is practical and legal. Shortly afterward, the California Supreme Court declared the death penalty unconstitutional, commuting all existing death sentences. Ed is being transported to the California State Prison in Vacaville to begin his sentence. He is 25 years old. If he lives the average life expectancy, he will spend more than 50 years in prison. As the trial concludes, an uncomfortable investigation remains into the systemic failures that allowed Ed to kill. How could someone with his history be released from a Atascadero? Why were his records sealed? Why was he placed with his mother? Precisely the situation all the early evaluators warned against. A state commission is investigating. Its findings are devastating. Multiple agencies failed at critical points. A Atascadero psychiatrist ignored early warnings. Probation officers failed to provide adequate supervision. The court system sealed records without considering public risks. But perhaps the biggest failure was that of the Santa Cruz police. For months, the killer they were desperately searching for sat among them, buying beers, listening to details of the investigation. His size, his knowledge of the victims, his constant presence near crime scenes, none of this raised any alarms. A detective, interviewed years later, admits, "He was right in front of us. I literally shared drinks with him dozens of times, and I never, not once, suspected anything." That haunts me to this day. The Ed Kemper case exposes uncomfortable truths about how society identifies and prevents serial violence. And those lessons, paid for the lives of 10 innocent people, will eventually transform modern criminology in ways no one in that California courtroom could fully anticipate. Edmund Kemper arrives at the California State Prison in Vacaville in November 1973. It's a medium-security facility, but for Ed, it becomes a permanent home. Its size and the nature of his crimes make him an instantly notable figure among the prison population. But Ed doesn't seek dominance or violence inside prison. Instead, he adapts with the same intelligence he used to deceive the police. He becomes a model prisoner, respectful of guards, non-troublesome, even helpful. He works in the prison library, where his photographic memory and love of books make him an invaluable asset. The first few years are a period of adjustment. Ed participates in mandatory therapy, although both he and the therapist recognize its futility. There is no cure for what Ed is. There is no rehabilitation possible. These sessions are more documentation than treatment. But something interesting happens during this period. Ed begins to reflect on his crimes more deeply, not with genuine remorse, but with a more nuanced understanding of what he was and what he did. It's as if, finally removed from the pressures that drove him, he can examine himself with something resembling objectivity. In 1977, for years after his incarceration, Ed receives unusual visitors. Agents from the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit, a new and experimental department, focus on understanding serial violent crimes. The agents, led by investigators who will eventually become legendary in criminology, had a proposal for Ed. They want to interview him extensively about his crimes, his psychology, his methods. They're developing something called criminal profiling and need data from real killers to build their models. Ed immediately accepts, not out of remorse or a desire to help society, but for more selfish reasons. He's bored. He enjoys the intellectual attention, and he likes the idea that his work will be studied and remembered. For Ed, these interviews are an opportunity to be a professor, to demonstrate his brilliance. Through dozens of hours of recorded interviews, Ed provides unprecedented insight into the killer's mind. He explains how he selected victims, how he gained their trust, how he evaded detection. He describes his fantasies in clinical detail. And crucially, he offers insights into what warning signs might have alerted authorities. The interviews with Ed Kemper, along with similar sessions with other serial killers, became the foundation of modern criminology. FBI agents used this information to develop serial killer profiles that helped capture dozens of criminals in the following decades. Ed explains concepts that are now standard in profiling: the difference between organized and disorganized killers, the importance of triggering stressors, and the role of fantasies in escalating violence. His exceptional intelligence allows him to articulate psychological processes that other killers can't or won't explain. A particular insight of Ed's becomes central to understanding serial killers: the distinction between surrogate victims and primary targets. Ed explains that the schoolgirls were substitutes for his mother, practiced for the murder he truly wanted to commit. This concept helps investigators understand why some killers appear to target random victims, when in reality they are killing symbolic representations of someone specific. The recordings of these interviews are eventually transcribed and studied in police academies, universities, and FBI training programs around the world. Ed's deep voice, describing atrocities with academic calm, becomes a haunting but invaluable educational tool. As the decades pass in Vacaville, Ed establishes a routine. He reads voraciously: psychology, criminology, history, literature. His cell fills with books. He corresponds with academic researchers studying violent crimes. Some criticize him for basking in the spotlight, but no one denies that his contributions to understanding serial killers are significant. Ed is also working on a unique project: recording audiobooks for blind. His deep, clear voice, the same one he used to trick victims and confess to crimes, now narrates literary classics. The irony is not lost on him. "Even my qualities can be put to good use," he says in an interview. He consistently refuses parole hearings. Although he's technically eligible every few years, Ed argues he should never be released. "I know what I am," he says. "I know what I would do if I were out. It would be irresponsible to set myself free." This self-awareness is perhaps the most disturbing thing about Ed Kemper. He's not a delusional monster who believes himself innocent. He's a man who fully understands his predatory nature and simply accepts that he's dangerous. There's no internal struggle, no moral conflict, only a clear recognition of what he is and why he must remain caged. As the decades pass, Ed Kemper becomes a figure of dark cultural fascination. His case is explored in documentaries, books, and true crime podcasts. His intelligence, his stature, and his ability to articulate his crimes make him an irresistible subject for those who study human evil. In 2017, the Netflix series Mindhunter featured Ed Kemper as a central character, reenacting his interviews with FBI agents. The actor who portrays him captures his intimidating physical presence and calm, articulate delivery. Millions of people around the world are introduced to his story. This media attention is controversial. Victims' families argue that it glorifies the killer, causing renewed pain. But researchers counter that understanding cases like Ed's is crucial to preventing future crimes. It's a debate with no easy answer. Ed himself, now in his 70s, continues to give occasional interviews from prison. His perspective has evolved slightly with age. He expresses what could be interpreted as remorse, though psychologists debate whether it's genuine or simply another act of the master manipulator. Today, Edmund Emil Kemper III remains incarcerated in California. serving 8 life sentences. He is over 75 years old. His health has declined. The giant body that was once his weapon is now a source of medical problems. But his mind remains sharp. In recent interviews, Ed discusses his crimes with the same clarity he had 50 years ago. His memory is intact. He can recite dates, details, and locations without hesitation. When asked about regret, Ed offers an answer he's honed over decades. I understand that I caused unimaginable pain. I understand that I destroyed families. If I could undo what I did, I would, but I can't. And I'm not sure that, being who I was then, I would have chosen differently. That's what makes me a monster. It is a confession that encapsulates the tragedy of Ed Kemper. Intelligence enough to fully understand the evil he did, but fundamentally incapable of feeling the emotional weight that should accompany that understanding. The lessons of his case resonate throughout modern criminology. The profiling methods he helped develop have undeniably saved lives. But he also paid a terrible price. 10 innocent lives, families torn apart, and a traumatized community. Santa Cruz never fully forgot the days when the co-ed killer stalked its roads. Older residents recall the fear, the paranoia, the shock when they discovered the killer was someone they knew. The university implemented changes in security protocols that remain in place today, and in FBI archives at universities and at police academies around the world. Ed Kemper's recordings continue to be studied. His deep voice explains how he selected victims, how he killed them, how he evaded capture. It's a grotesque but undeniably important legacy. Ed Kemper was called the smartest serial killer in history, and perhaps he was. But that intelligence didn't save him from himself. It didn't prevent the violence he perpetrated. It provided no purpose or meaning beyond destruction. Instead, his brilliance only made his crimes more efficient, his capture later, and his legacy more complex. He is remembered not as a genius who may have contributed something valuable to the world, but as a monster whose intelligence only amplified his capacity for evil. And so he remains, the giant in his cell, slowly aging, his massive body wasting away while his mind remains trapped in the crimes he committed more than 50 years ago. He is a living monument to an unanswerable question. Can intelligence exist without consciousness? Can someone fully understand humanity while being completely divorced from it? Edmund Kemper offers no comforting answer. Only a disturbing one. Yes, it can. And when it happens, the consequences are devastating and long-lasting. His story is a warning about the failures of systems designed to protect, about the limitations of rehabilitation when applied to certain types of pathology, and about the dangers of underestimating the human capacity for deception and violence. But it is also, in a strange and disturbing way, a contribution to science. The evil that Ed Kemper personifies has been studied, categorized, and understood in ways that help prevent similar cases in the future. It doesn't redeem his actions. Nothing could, but it gives a certain meaning to the lives lost. His tragedy helped protect others. The most intelligent serial killer in history remains in prison, where he will remain until his death. And when he finally passes away, he will leave behind a complex legacy, a monster and a teacher, a murderer and an educator, a giant whose shadow looms over modern criminology in ways no one would have chosen, but which everyone must acknowledge. This is a story of Edmund Kemper. It's not a redemption story. There's no happy ending. Just the raw truth about what humans are capable of when exceptional intelligence combines with profound pathology, and when systems designed to protect fail at critical points. It's history that continues to teach, decades after crimes ended. And that may be the ultimate irony. Ed Kemper, who destroyed 10 lives, is now helping save others to the lessons learned from his atrocities. It's not justice, but it's something. And for the families of his victims, for the community of Santa Cruz, for all those affected by his violence, it is perhaps the only possible consolation that the evil he did wasn't entirely in vain, that something good eventually emerged from the absolute darkness. The giant remains caged, and so it should be.